Now that digestion and absorption are done, our next step is going to be transport. So first, we break down the nutrients so that they're small enough to be absorbed. Then they're absorbed into the cells of the small intestine, and they're basically going to hang around in those cells of the small intestine until the body picks them up and transport them to wherever they need to go. And we have two main systems that we can use for this transport, and that is our vascular system and then our lymphatic system. And before we take a look at these two different systems, I just want you all to know the differences between them. The main difference is what each one is responsible for transporting. The vascular system is going to be what transports our water-soluble nutrients and some small fats, but the main one that's going to be responsible for fat transport is going to be the lymphatic system. It's going to take our fat-soluble nutrients and our large fats. There's also a difference in what they are composed of, which is blood, or our red blood cells, for our vascular system. So the vascular system is your bloodstream, and the lymphatic system is made of a substance called lymph, which is primarily composed of white blood cells. Another difference is the way that they are handled by the liver. The vascular system, any nutrients that pass through the system are going to be detoxified by the liver from their very first round around the body. The nutrients that go through the lymphatic system are actually going to bypass the liver on the first round. Now this will make a little bit more sense in a minute when we go ahead and look at the diagram. So let's go ahead and look at that. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the different transport systems, starting with the vascular system. The vascular system is your bloodstream, and remember, blood can be pumped to all different parts of your body, but for the purpose of this class, we're just going to focus on how the blood picks up nutrients from your small intestine and then transports it elsewhere. So for that, we're just going to focus on these few organs that I have listed for you here. Now, before we get into all of the different steps, I want to mention a few tips that can help you memorize all of the different arteries and veins that make up this system. And the first thing is to remember that the blood will usually leave your heart through arteries and then enter your heart through veins. So if something is leaving your heart, it will usually leave in an artery. If it's entering your heart, it will usually be entering as a vein. Another thing to remember is anytime you hear the word hepatic, it's referring to your liver. Anytime you hear the word pulmonary, it's referring to your lungs. So now that we have those tips down, let's go ahead and take a look at the different steps of the vascular system and how we can put these tips to use. So the very first thing that we have is the heart, and the heart is the pump of the vascular system. It's what's going to help move the blood along. So we're going to start off pumping blood from the right side into your lungs. Here we are going to be picking up oxygen and dropping off carbon dioxide. Now, if we want to know what to name this arrow here, first thing we know is that it is going to your lungs. Remember, anything related to the lungs is called pulmonary. So we already know pulmonary should be part of the name. The next thing that we know is that it is leaving the heart. We know when something leaves the heart, it leaves in an artery. So now we have two words down, pulmonary and artery. And that's exactly what this is called. This is our pulmonary artery because it's going to the lungs and it's leaving the heart. So this is going to be how you're going to be able to use those tips to help you memorize these. Now, after we've picked up oxygen in the lungs, we can go ahead and send that oxygenated blood back into the heart. And this one is still, again, related to the lungs since it's leaving the lungs. So it will also be pulmonary, but since it's entering your heart, remember blood enters the heart through veins. So this will be pulmonary vein. Now after that, we can go ahead and pump that oxygenated blood back out, and blood leaves your heart primarily through one really large artery called the aorta. So this one has its own special name. And the aorta can send blood straight to the liver, or it can branch off and send blood to the intestines instead. Now, if it were to go straight to the liver, it's going to be detoxified there. That's what the liver's role is. The liver's role is to detoxify anything that comes its way. So the blood is going to go through the liver to make sure there's nothing toxic, and then the liver can go ahead and pump that blood back to the heart. Now, since this relates to the liver, we're going to call it hepatic, and since it is entering the heart, it will be a vein, so our hepatic vein. Now, if the aorta instead sent the blood to the small intestine, what's going to happen is we're going to pick up all of those nutrients that we absorbed. So if you remember, we had a bunch of nutrients that were absorbed into the cells of the small intestine, and now they're just hanging around in those cells waiting to be picked up. So when the blood goes from the aorta to the small intestine, it's going to pick up all those nutrients that were sitting in the cells of the small intestine and send them to the liver. Now, this is something that relates to the liver, so you'll see we called it hepatic again, since it's going to the liver. It's also on its way to enter the heart, and remember, things that enter the heart are called vein. But in order to differentiate it from the one that's going directly into the heart, we put the word portal in there. So this is called our hepatic portal vein. Now that we've covered the vascular system, let's go ahead and take a look at the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system isn't its own system really, it's more so an added step onto the vascular system. Remember, the vascular system is our bloodstream, and the lymphatic system was there to take nutrients that the bloodstream couldn't take on initially on its own. So things like our larger fats and the fat-soluble nutrients needed to go through the lymphatic system instead. And the reason for this is, remember, the fats are going to be hydrophobic, meaning they don't want to mix with a fluid. Technically, your blood is a fluid, so the fats don't necessarily feel comfortable mixing in there, entering straight into your bloodstream. So what they're going to want to do is basically create that outer layer, the hydrophilic outer layer around them, like we saw earlier with bile, because that will allow them to feel safe entering into the bloodstream. So again, for those larger fats, we want to surround them with a hydrophilic layer, repackage them that way, so that they can enter the bloodstream. Now, the problem is that if those fats are already large, and then we add a hydrophilic layer around them, sometimes they can be too large to enter straight into the bloodstream. The entryway from the small intestine into the bloodstream is more narrow than that. And so the lymphatic system is there to allow the fats to enter in a different place where the entryway is not as narrow, and those larger fats can enter into the bloodstream there where we have a less narrow entryway. So that's the gist of the lymphatic system. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that would work. So for the nutrients that couldn't be picked up by the bloodstream directly, instead they're going to filter into what we call the lymph, and through there they have access to the subclavian vein, which is actually a vein that empties out into the hepatic vein. So it opens up to the hepatic vein, which is actually a larger entryway for those larger fats. So the larger fats actually get a chance to enter and become part of the vascular system when they enter at the hepatic vein, because that is a larger entryway. So if they couldn't fit before straight from the small intestine, they can enter into the lymph, into the subclavian vein, and then the subclavian vein will empty into the hepatic vein, which is a larger entryway that can allow the larger fats to become part of the bloodstream. So as you can see, the lymphatic system isn't its own system. It's just this added step that we have to add on to allow the larger fats to make way to an entry point where they can actually fit and enter into the bloodstream. After that, they become part of the vascular system just like the other nutrients, and they will continue going around the body. Now remember, the lymphatic system, we said the nutrients will bypass the liver on the first round. You can see why that is. The nutrients that enter through the lymphatic system are entering into the hepatic vein. The hepatic vein has already left the liver. So they basically missed their chance to come by the liver on their first time around just because they enter too late. But again, they're part of the vascular system now, so they will get a chance to come around again. And at that point, they will be able to come by the liver and be detoxified.